Yep, we can see it, and I just started the recording as well.
Perfect, thank you. And we can get started. So, as I said, we are basically releasing the 8.1 release, which is kind of shipping out right now as we speak. In the next 7 to 10 days, it should roll out to all production servers. We wanted to talk about a few of the select features that we're shipping with the 8.1 release. And to start off with, we have added support for an advanced feature called auxiliary replicas. I'm not going to talk about it right now because I do believe Manoj should be joining in soon to kind of give like a overview of what auxiliary replicas is about. Um, Peter, if you can do me a favor and follow up if Manoj is going to join the call, that would be great. I don't see him online just yet. And the second one is kind of self-explanatory. We have added preview .NET support, .NET 6.0 support for Service Fabric applications. This currently is in preview support. It is expected to go GA in November when .NET 6.0 ships. But we do kind of have the feature available for people to try out. The third one is we've added some REST APIs, which provide support for updating application parameters. What it essentially would allow them to do is provide an application name and some parameters such as, minimum node, maximum node, application metric, whether an application capacity should be removed or not. And this also has support for PowerShell. So you can find more information about that in the release notes that will go out soon. The next one we've added is kind of, it's in the line of a health check per se. We do, one of the most common incidents that we get as far as Service Fabric is concerned is, and I'm using the term loosely here, but some job is kind of in a stuck state or in a frozen state. And that's probably the one that we investigate the most. So as part of and fix for that, the thing that we've added is a kind of a heartbeat message, which does a periodic check between the RA, which is the reconfiguration agent in fabric.exe, and the reconfiguration agent proxy, which runs in the user process. And if, for example, for 15 minutes or so, that heartbeat message is not acknowledged back, then it automatically assumes there's either an IPC failure or some kind of a process failure, or something is in a frozen state, and it restarts the user process. So this is a new functionality that we've added in. We've also added in, health probes for non-containerized application. It's pretty well documented. We do already have health probes for containerized application. We've also added for non-containerized application now. And the additional thing that we've also done is we've provided functionality so that cluster upgrade information like node capacity updates can be done without having an impact or a disruption to the running workloads. So that's another thing that we have kind of seamlessly done. We've also made some DNS improvements, Service Fabric DNS improvements. I do believe Alex is on the call and he is going to speak about it. So I'm going to leave the explanation for that for now, and I'm going to let Alex pick it up from there. I don't know if Manoj has joined in yet. Is Manoj on the call?
Hey, yes, I'm here.
Yeah. All yours, Manoj, to talk about.
All right. Thank you, Skinner. So yeah, so today, like as you guys probably know, for stateful services, we have something called a target replica set size that determines like how many replicas will be running in the partition. So today, let's say like we have a target replica set size of 3. That means we will have 1 primary and 2 active secondary replicas. What this means is you have 3 copies of your code running on different nodes, right? So at steady state, so these are all the 3 copies running. They are consuming some resources from the cluster, like CPU, memory, and all that. So there was a request here, like, can we have some sort of like, savings on the how many cluster resources it is using. So we'll make some compromises, but can we save some cluster resources? And the reason why like the primary and active secondaries are consuming resources over here is because the primary is serving all the read and write requests, and the secondaries are also serving the read requests, and you can opt in for that. So this is how the request for auxiliary replicas came in. If you can go to the next slide. All right. So with this 8.1 release, we are now introducing a new kind of replica called auxiliary replica. So this replica has some restrictions. Like, for example, this replica is not going to participate in the primary election. So whenever we want to swap over our primaries, active secondaries are the only candidates which we have. The second thing is this auxiliary replica will not have read and write access. So that means like, even though the replicator is copying some data, we cannot read data from the auxiliary replica. So you can think of it like, it would need some sort of changes in the replicator as well, where replicator understands like, hey, these are the auxiliary replicas. Nobody's going to read from them. So you may not want to copy all the data to them. So what this means is, since this guy auxiliary replica doesn't have to become a primary, and then it doesn't have read and write access. So you can see like it's participating in the quorum calculation where your partition still has the same degree of fault tolerance. But at the same time, this guy doesn't need to be allocated same amount of resources as primary and secondary replicas. So what this means is, at a steady state, where you have 3 copies of your service running, they're consuming less resources than what you will have with 3 full replicas, right? If you can hit next, I think I have one more text box. Yep. So this feature is being worked with the partnership with the SQL team. So they are the first, like, I guess, early adopters for this. So what you need to have this feature enabled and to use it is like some sort of resource governance, right? So you can have like resource governance, like an RG manager or something, which basically tracks like how much resources each replica is using. And then RG understands that auxiliary replicas are going to consume less resources. That means you can pack more replicas densely on the single node. You will also need some sort of replicator changes where like your replicator understands that this is the auxiliary replica. I don't need to copy all the data and everything, maybe some bare minimum stuff to make sure that there is no data loss or anything like that. So today there are no plans to ship SF replicator with these changes because SQL owns its own replicator. They have made the corresponding changes over there. But yeah, we can always like augment SF replicator to use this functionality. So yeah, the primary motivation was the COGS improvement for this feature. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. So if you guys have questions about this, we do have a little bit of time allocated in the very end, and you can ask questions about auxiliary replica. We also have Alec on the call, who's going to quickly talk about Service Fabric DNS and some of the improvements that we've made. Alec, all yours.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to include an overview just in case some of you are unfamiliar with DNS service and what it does. So basically, DNS service is an optional stateless service, and it runs on every node when it's enabled. And it allows communicating with service fabric services by assigning DNS names to them, but these names are only valid within the context of the cluster itself. The way it works is that when calling a service fabric service, it resolves the addresses by calling the internal APIs. And then otherwise, if it's like a public name, it forwards the queries to other DNS servers. And the list of servers that we use are taken directly from the node itself. Next slide, please. So one of the major changes we made in DNS service for 8.1 is that we rewrote the forwarding layer that's used for recursive queries. And the major change is basically we switched from dynamically creating sockets to reusing a fixed pool of sockets. And the reason for this rewrite was because we wanted to fix issues that we saw in the past when DNS service had high request rates or the forwarding server was returning responses slowly. As a side effect of the change, we also saw improvements in the forwarding path. So now we don't really spend time creating and binding sockets for each request. So we save time there. The start address and the number of sockets is configurable at the cluster level. So if you're using restricted firewall rules, you need to make sure that traffic is allowed to flow between DNS service and the forwarding servers. Next slide, please. And some other changes we made is basically we improved the retry capabilities when calling Service Fabric APIs from within DNS service. So the retry count and the delay between retries are now configurable at the cluster level. And then for the full list of config changes in DNS service, please refer to the release notes for 8.1. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Alec. Again, if you have any questions about this, just hang on for a little bit more time. We also have Pavan on the call, who basically, kind of implemented the .NET 6.0 support. It was pretty self-explanatory. There was nothing that we could add to the presentation, but if you have any questions, we do have Pavan on the call who can kind of help answer your specific questions. You can kind of, again, we can kind of take it now if you want, or if we want, we can wait till the open Q&A session, whichever way you guys want to do it. I'll give it a minute. If somebody has specific questions about .NET 6.0 support, just let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay. I'm kind of not monitoring the message sections yet, so I'll request Peter. Peter, if you can keep an eye out on that, we can come back to it as well. Or if there was some immediate question regarding the slide, can you just kind of let me know?
Yep, Whit actually has a question on .NET 6 support
Uh-huh.
on whether or not it will address the unsafe binary serialization issue.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Whit. Pavan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. We are actually working on the binary serialization fix, and this is not available in 8.1 yet, and it will be available in 8.2. Yeah, you still need to use the same config which we suggested for .NET 5, which is add unsafe serialization flag in your project file to make it work.
Great, thanks.
Presentation, but that's it.
Thank you, Pavan. If there's no other question, I just want to quickly, because we're short of time, so I want to talk about some of the release schedule.
Sorry, Sukanya. Robert seems to have a question. We can't quite hear you though, Robert.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Please say that again. Repeat the question.
Or maybe type it into chat. It might be a bit easier.
Sorry, Robert, we still can't hear you. Do you want to kind of type your question into the chat? Okay, we're going to give him a couple of minutes to type his questions in the chat while we move forward. We'll come back to his question during the Q&A session. So one of the most common things that we have been asked is a general schedule. So we're trying to publish most of the schedule in advance. So currently, as we speak, the 8.1 RTO release is shipping out to all production servers. Again, as I mentioned at the start of the session, pretty much most of in the next week to 10 days, all the production servers will be upgraded. We do have a fixed CU schedule in place. I'm sorry about the typo. That should be CU1 and CU2. But CU1 ships out in August, CU2 in September, and CU3, it is currently planned for October as made available, which essentially means it's not an auto upgrade. But all the CU3 changes will also be added to the 8.2 RTO release, which also is planned to ship out in October. We still have to come up with the CU plan for 8.2, so we're not publishing that yet. The general schedule for 2022 is very simple. In March, we have the 9.0 release, give or take a few weeks. In July, we plan out the 9.1 release. And in October, we plan out the 9.2 release. Again, all of these dates are more of a ballpark. The schedule might change for 2022, give or take a few weeks based on, the state at that particular point of time. We still haven't published the CU schedules for the 9.0, 9.1, and 9.2 releases. And hopefully in the upcoming sessions, we will have more clarity into some of these CU schedules. Again, if you have any questions, our next slide is going to be about open Q&A. So I kind of move on to that. So if you have any questions, again, I want to thank Manoj, Pavan, and Alec for joining in. They are still available on the call. If you have any specific questions about auxiliary replicas or Service Fabric DNS changes or improvements, or the .NET 6.0 support changes, they are available on the call to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask questions. And thank you, Manoj, Alec, and Pavan. I know you've just typed out a big question. Honestly, I'm sorry, I apologize, but my screen doesn't allow me to see the message. So
right.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. It doesn't have to be on the message.
Sure. Yeah, just three of them. So I guess just going back to the auxiliary replica, you had mentioned that the SQL team is using it, but if the SF replicator that's comes with it and the reliable collections don't use it, I guess what does use it? What's the benefit I get from it in this release?
Right. So I think for now, auxiliary replica, yes, it's going to be only a SQL team specific feature. So they are basically, you can think of it like first party team which is planning to take over this thing. And then what we are going to do is over the next several months, we'll see how it turns out, how much benefits their cost saving, then looking at it. And then that would obviously generate interest from other folks as well. Hey, if they are seeing that much improvement in their cogs, this might be something which is super useful for others. So, and we already have replicator design in place because SQL replicator already implemented this. So that will basically, if there is a lot of interest, and then we can basically bring it into the SF replicator as well. That will open up this feature for everybody.
Makes sense. I guess since they have their own replicator, is there anything published about what's different about it and why they use a separate one?
So they do have, so I'm not 100% familiar with what unique about their own replicator, but they do have their own logic behind the replicator. So it's I would say very similar to what SF replicator does today, but they do have some custom logic built into it. So Matt, do you know if there is anything that stands out?
Not really. The Service Fabric replicator was modeled on SQL's replicator. It's Service Fabric, right? SQL databases have been replicated and had primaries and secondaries for years and years before Service Fabric existed. So we cribbed a lot of the design of our replication engine from SQL. So It's not substantially different from Service Fabric today. There are some differences in how they calculate progress, what types of operations get sent, whether they're all logical or some of them are physical. There are some interesting optimizations that they've made that can be SQL specific, but the overall form and function of it is largely the same as Service Fabrics.
Cool. Next question. I guess, are there any plans to support .NET 6's hot reloading functionality? So, just being able to make a change, especially since I build a lot of websites that run on top of Service Fabric, being able to make a change and then see that in the browser without, stopping the whole application and completely redeploying it locally.
Right. So we don't have any plan as on today defined for hot reloading, but we'll evaluate the request and get back.
Great. And then I guess on each of the roadmaps, I guess it's nice seeing the timelines, but from a what's included in each of those, I guess is the OS feature parity for, I guess there's chaos testing is not available on Linux, and recently found event store queries are not available on Linux. Are those coming to a future release too?
So that's a good question. We're actually still working on some of the roadmap backlog items. I explicitly didn't include that this time around because we wanted to define some of that more clearly before we can actually publish it out. So hopefully in the upcoming sessions, we will have a little bit more clarity into what each one of those would include. To be very honest, we probably will have about 3 to 6 months of visibility, not the 2022
Sure.
schedule, but we will definitely try and publish a little bit more information in the upcoming sessions.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
That's all I had.
With just to follow up on your query, is there a particular flavor of Linux that you're using and you're interested in?
No, just trying to get away from the really expensive Windows licensing.
Right, thank you.
Henry, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I missed the very beginning, so sorry if this was already mentioned, but there was a mention in one of the previous meetings about liveness and readiness probes. Was that on the roadmap?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your question. What was it? Can you repeat that again, please?
So somebody mentioned in one of the previous community calls that there was going to be a new feature for liveness and readiness probes.
Right.
Is that...
So yes, for non-containerized applications. So liveness and readiness probes already exist for containerized applications. With the 8.1 release, we're actually introducing liveness and readiness probes for containerized applications, for non-containerized applications as well. That is correct. The release notes will have more information on it. I'll also kind of share out the documentation for it as soon as that gets published as well.
Cool, great.
No problem. So circling back to Robert, Robert, did you get a chance to ask your question, or was your question answered, or did you type in the messages with your question? Again, I apologize, I can't look at the messages, so if you have it, let me know.
There are a few questions from Andy. Andy, if you want, you can just ask the questions out loud.
Sure. We're versioning some reliable collections and want to be able to remove the models that were stored in previous versions. But currently that requires waiting for the transaction logs to truncate. I'm wondering if there's a different known solution or plans to make one.
I don't know if Matt wants to pick this one up, but I'm not aware of any such plans. Matt, Saurabh, do you guys have more visibility into it, or Peter?
So today, you still do have to wait for the transaction log to truncate, and that's a non-deterministic amount of time, right? You kind of gotta at the size of what's on disk in order to figure it out. There are events, I think, or there are traces at least to tell when transaction log truncation is happening. There has been talk of adding an explicit truncate operation that you could send to the replica, but it doesn't exist today. That's how we're thinking about addressing it, because forcing truncation is useful in a bunch of other scenarios as well. But today you just sort of gotta, what I tend to do when I've dealt with this is I have a sort of test environment on the side, and I upgrade that one the same way, and then wait, and then try the upgrade in the test environment to make sure that, you know, if it's running at the same rate as production, then whenever it's safe in test, it's usually safe in prod. But that's unfortunately the best science that exists for this.
Okay, then my next question is, are there any limitations for running Service Fabric on Azure Stack?
None that we're aware of.
So
you end up with Service Fabric standalone.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is the thing. You end up with Service Fabric standalone because we haven't brought Service Fabric as a resource provider down to Azure Stack. So you end up using it as Service Fabric standalone. You stand up a bunch of IaaS VMs on Azure Stack, and then deploy Service Fabric on top of them as if it was any other on-prem deployment.
Okay, great. And then is there a way to get the Service Fabric system services to log out to App Insights?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think that there are instructions. There's certainly instructions for how to get your stuff to trace out to App Insights. I think that the best practices guide talks about what your options are for the system components. I'd have to go check. But that would be a good place to start. If you just, you know, Google or search Service Fabric best practices guide, you'll land on a bunch of pages. And one of them is explicitly about monitoring and diagnostics and that sort of stuff. The information would be there. If there are instructions, they would be there.
Thank you, Matt. So if there are any other questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we're almost out of time. We're all still available over Yammer or, you know, GitHub, or so if you have any further questions, you can always feel free to reach out, and we'll try to get your questions answered. Any questions? Awesome. Thank you again, everyone, for joining in, and thank you to the engineering team, Manoj, Pavan, as well as Alec, to join in and help answer the questions. And we'll see you guys next time. Appreciate you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.